The federal budget is just around the corner. This week, the Liberal government has been making housing announcements right across the country, pledging billions of dollars that will be included in its economic plan to tackle the country's housing crisis. But with the cost of rent continuing to rise and concerns over supply, the question remains of whether it will be enough. Now, for more on this, we're joined by Paul Kershaw from the University of British Columbia. Professor, thank you for speaking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's start with the recent pledges made by the federal government. Today, the Prime Minister announced the launch of a Canada Rental Protection Fund. Yesterday, he added another $15 billion to the Apartment Construction Loan Program. And those are just the latest in a series of new housing measures. So based on what you've seen ahead of this budget, what impact will those programs have on the current situation?
Well, I think there is absolutely no doubt we have to acknowledge that this federal government is continuing to implement the homework that it's done over the last many years to figure out the range of policy levers that we need to pull to try and restore affordability forever. We've long been saying there's no silver bullet. The government has accepted that. And so they're saying that we need silver buckshot, and they are doing a lot of things quickly all at once. And we should be excited that, today's most recent announcement is another example of the government partnering with nonprofit housing organizations to scale up the supply of housing that is delivered below market rates. And that's so critical right now, as especially young people's earnings are not keeping pace with the cost of housing. And as you mentioned, they also, added to their already successful plan to scale up the construction of apartment buildings, as more and more people are going to be renters for longer periods of their lives because they didn't happen to be born at the same time as I am, and I got to be an owner with my earnings. Other people with my earnings now can't get into ownership, so we need more rental supply. We need to be scaling up, the defense of renters, and so the Renters' Bill of Rights is an interesting example of another policy also announced in the last week. It's kind of a whirlwind of announcements. If you're looking for action on housing affordability, you've got to acknowledge right now this federal government is delivering.
All right, and Professor, speaking of young people, Trudeau did mention them yesterday. He said it's not fair that young people can't afford a place to live. Some can't even imagine being able to buy a home one day. Can you talk about how dire the situation facing younger generations is when it comes to housing these days?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're talking to the founder of Generation Squeeze. And so, we've been calling for governments to make this country work once again for all generations. So we're really delighted to see the federal government promise fairness for every generation, and housing's at the center. For literally decades now, too many governments have kind of been asleep at the wheel as we tolerated home prices leaving earnings behind. We did so because people like me, I'm 50, and people older than me, as homeowners, we got wealthier as the value of our homes went up, especially in Ontario and BC. But it's meant our kids and grandchildren get locked out of homeownership, and their consolation prize is lousy. It's rising rents. And now this is a problem that has been decades in the making. And so the problem facing young people today and newcomers of any age is that you can't fix this problem overnight. And that's the patience we're now begging of a younger demographic. We have to kind of apologize. We screwed up the housing system. We extracted too much wealth out of it for people of my demographic, and we've left little affordability left over. Young folks are facing that problem. We are begging for them to be patient and tolerant as we're trying to fix it. And we have to ask an older demographic, myself included, who has benefited, what more can we do to help contribute to delivering deeply affordable housing once again?
All right, Professor, in its spring housing supply report, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation outlined that supply has not kept up with rental demand, and that will continue. So, what does that mean for the current crisis? Can we anticipate it will only get worse?
I think we should acknowledge that 2023 was a year that we didn't see average home prices rise, and we haven't had anything that good news to celebrate for some time in Canada. When I focus on average prices in the home ownership market, that does matter because as those values go up, it has been then contributing to rising rents. Rents, though, have continued to rise, as you just acknowledged, and there is no magic bullet coming in the next months ahead. I think that the reality that we need to acknowledge is that in order for us to deliver more affordable housing and more rental housing, we are going to have to ask more and more those of us who've been to figure out how can we contribute some of the benefits that we've gained. Like I've gained $1.5 million in my home. It's a principal residence, so it's not taxed. We need to think about how we might ask people like me to contribute some of what I've gained in order to, start to either subsidize the rents for people, get more of this rental built, because in the short term, it's still going to be hard for younger Canadians and newcomers of any age. I wish it would be otherwise. It's going to take a little more time to turn it around. But then let's go back to where we started today. After decades of inaction on housing, provincially and federally, we have at the federal level now a government taking many actions all at once. We're going to need to be more patient, and we're going to need to recognize it's not just the supply of housing that matters. If supply were the only factor, then actually Alberta should have higher home prices than BC and Ontario, because there is less supply per capita in that province than there is in BC and Ontario. So we need to pay attention to supply. And we also need to be mindful of the way in which we kind of have an addiction in Canada to high and rising home values. We sort of wanted housing to be both a place to call home and a way to make a good investment return, a way to get rich. We really need to keep thinking about the policies that slow down the demand side factors that have been driving housing prices as well and driving rising rents. Today's announcement about having a fund to purchase existing affordable rentals and protecting that and adding more to that pool is a critical next step. And so I'm going to celebrate the good news, even amidst the context that remains really hard and difficult for younger Canadians.
All right, well, I love your positive outlook, Professor, but I have to ask, we know housing is a provincial responsibility, and Ottawa has said time and again it is trying to collaborate with provinces and territories on these housing measures. But how effective has the government been in actually getting buy-in from them?
Well, I got to give credit to Minister Fraser with his Accelerator Fund. For many, many years, we have seen both municipalities and to some degree provinces resist the idea that we needed to add density in land already zoned for housing. Much of the land zone for housing has been reserved for single detached homes, duplexes, and we minimally need to be adding 4-unit homes to that land if we're going to have enough supply. That has been called for by groups like Gen Squeeze. I think we started calling for that in 2015. Federal government, use your infrastructure investments, your housing investments to say provinces and cities, you'll get the biggest share only if you add density to land already zoned for housing. Now with the Accelerator Fund under the leadership of Minister Fraser, you're actually seeing that happen. And I have never seen so many municipalities respond by changing their zoning, overcoming the NIMBYism that has interfered with that in the past. Now, in Ontario, I have heard Premier Ford kind of resist the call for fourplexes. I don't understand why the Premier is doing that, because his own housing task force is asking for the same innovation, asking for the additional density. And he's not going to meet his goal of having another 1.5 million homes over the next year if we don't do this. And so I'm not sure the politics at play there, but I hope that Premier Ford can be brought on board sooner than later, because we need that density. And the Accelerator Fund introduced by the federal government is working on that front in a way that I have not witnessed as a housing analyst in years past.
Well, that is a question we want to put to the Ontario Housing Minister. Why draw the line at triplexes? So closing on all this, Professor, we want to get your take on what would you say needs to be included in the budget on April 16th to actually make a difference to the issues we're seeing with housing affordability right across the country?
Well, I think one of the things I'm going to be looking for is actually something that the Prime Minister bravely said last fall, and I want to see it repeated, and then I want every Premier to accept it as well. What's our goal for housing prices? Not just what's our goal for the number of homes we build, what's our goal for housing prices? And if we're not saying we want home prices to stall in order to restore affordability for all, giving our earnings a chance to catch up and reduce the pressures on rentals, if we don't have that goal kind of clearly articulated, I worry that we're not going to remain on track. And so I think the goal matters, so that we then organize all of our policy levers to be moving towards that North Star. If we don't have that goal and we just talk about a certain number of units that we want to get built, we can build those units, but they may not come in at affordable rates because we're not doing all that we need to do to ensure affordability. So I'm looking for that goal, and then I think every policy lever can be recalibrated accordingly.
All right, Professor, thank you very much for your insights today. We appreciate them.
Have a great day.
Thank you. That is Paul Kershaw joining us from British Columbia.